Flow Unleashed.
Have you ever tried to perform as an energetic being? Or seen yourself primarily as an energetic being, using your energy as a primary focal point for your keynote, coaching session, or sporting performance, for example? Welcome to Flow Unleashed. I'm Dr. Cameron Norsworthy, scientist and high-performance coach to multiple world champions. In this show, we unpack key insights on specific topics so that you are kept up to date with the latest science and practice of human performance. When you walk into a room full of people, do you get a sense of what is happening? Perhaps you pick up on the mood or how people are feeling. Sure, we all do. But have you ever wondered how we do this? For instance, much of this information we are sensing is picked up before our brain even has time to process it. But how is this possible? Put simply, our brain, whilst it is our biggest command center, is affected by a number of other receiving systems in our body. Most primal of all is our energetic systems. Our energetics are continuously working behind the scenes, transmitting and receiving all the time to assist our communication and interaction with the environment. In fact, we rely on this information for more than we think. For example, in flow, we seem to go beyond the restraints of technique, pain, fatigue, time, and self. All these modes of operating fade away when we are deeply engaged in a task. In flow, it is as if every cell and atom work cohesively towards one aim, and we seemingly tap into an abundance of energy, channeling it perfectly, as if we are turning on the tap that we have kept hidden for special occasions. We may reflect in awe of how our body executed with such precision and power, or how we work for so long without a break, unsure how to explain how our body applied itself in such an extraordinary manner. As a result, we often stop trying to understand it and quickly move on to something more tangible, more explainable. Physicist and electrical inventor Nikola Tesla once stated, "If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration." And my experience is that when we do, when we think in terms of energy and take the time to sense the situation, we think and feel differently. We react and act differently. Like the electricity that runs through our houses, or the love we feel for our partner or family member. We cannot see this energy that is buzzing around and within our bodies with our own eyes. Yet, it is undeniable. Energy runs through our bodies like water through bathroom pipes. And when this energy is harnessed and concentrated, it can increase our ability and performance. For example, Dr. Kira Seto and his team of scientists from Yokohama, Japan, reported in the journal Electrotherapeutics Research that martial arts experts have measured significantly higher pulsating magnetic fields from their palms of their hands when preparing for an energetic punch. Seto's studies revealed that the emitted chi from the subject's palms produced a magnetic field 1,000 times stronger than a human's normal biomagnetic field. This act also created significant changes in measures of infrasound, electromagnetism, static electricity, infrared radiation, gamma rays, particle and wave flows, organic ion flows, and light, suggesting that there is a lot happening when the mind and body are focused on harnessing and releasing energy. This energetic movement, which we typically take for granted and don't harness consciously, is seemingly measurable in a multitude of markers. One person who has spent their career helping actors and performers see themselves as energetic beings and energetic performers to enhance their performance is Amanda Brennan. Amanda is an author, award-winning producer, judge at several film festivals, and coach to actors on many films including Aliens and The Crown. Amanda works as an acting coach to help actors on skill development and preparation for their productions. As a practitioner, Amanda has worked in theatre, film, television and conservatoire institutions nationally and internationally, and lectures at multiple universities. I'm excited to chat with Amanda as she has studied a wide variety of specialisms, which she integrates into her coaching practices, from somatic psychology to energetics, from physiology to method acting. Amanda has a holistic approach to help performers get into their zone. Hey, Amanda, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So what is an energetic performer? What does that mean?
Okay, so for me, it means somebody who is really connected and in touch with their internal life. So in acting, we talk about the internal, and the internal is composed of your thoughts, your emotions, your sensations, your flow, your energy flow, your chi flow. And the energetic performer is somebody who really has a connected relationship with their inner life.
How does it help to think of things in terms of energy? Like often when I'm working with someone and I help them to kind of see what they're doing from an energetic perspective, it removes those mental barriers, those physical hurdles or withstraints that we often put upon ourselves. How do you find when you work with someone and you help them see themselves as an energetic performer, how does it help them?
It places them in their body. So my go-to is not to talk about what do you think, it's what do you feel or what do you sense. And as soon as you say that, it does limit the thinking because you're traveling into a different place. You're not, what do you think? Oh, I'm thinking. What do you feel? Where are the sensations in your body? Where is your breath? Do you feel it in your heart or your gut? What's happening with your feet? So you guide them away from the habit to make something over complex and to bring it to life, because thinking is only part of the story. The more interesting part is what you feel.
I love that question. What do you sense? You know, we're so often asked, what do you think about that? What do you feel about that? Which evokes quite a linear response.
When you say to someone, what do you sense? Also, what you sense might not be in your body. It might be in the atmosphere, because that's all the time what we're looking at is atmospheres and the environments, and our environments change us. So you go from a public place to a private space, or we go to an environment and you kind of sense something's happening. And that's the wisdom of the body. The wisdom of the body is somehow informing you that something's not right. And that often happens either very quickly at the same time as the thought, or it appears that it can precede the thought. And that's really interesting, that you sense, like an animal senses danger, whether or not they think about it, but you sense it in the atmosphere. You read somebody and somebody walks in the space and you immediately can clock before they've spoken, they're not happy. Something's happening. It's a sense. And that's really important to develop that skill or that awareness.
And how did you get into this? I hear you started Qigong because of an injury, and then you appreciated the impact it had on how you felt and how it reduced your overthinking. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah. I've always been trained physically, so I would say that I was aware of my body. But yeah, I had an injury. I had a problem with my lower back, and I had developed spondylolisthesis, which is with L5 and L3. And somebody said I was going through physio, this fairly standard physio, and somebody said to me, you should try Qigong and see what happens. And I knew about Tai Chi because I'd done some Tai Chi But I went along and tried it, and I was absolutely stunned by its capacity, the capacity to feel and to really direct my attention into my body. So to leave the overthinking. And there's part of the training, I did elemental Qigong. There's all sorts of different strands of Qigong, and that's really fascinating. There's a lot of it has the same principle, and it all has the same principles, but a lot of the movements and the postures are the same, but there's some slightly different versions. So elemental really draws on the 5 elements in Chinese traditional medicine. And it just immediately somehow connected me with the idea of upper body, so yin and yang, upper energy, lower energy, and just that observation of we are very good, most of us, of communicating with upper yang energy because it's forward, it's up. We look at people all the time. But then what happens to back energy? What happens to lower energy? And I just then started to translate that into teaching and looking at the challenges, the repeated challenges of what I find when I teach. And most of the time it was about physicality. It was this, why are they so stiff? What's happening? Why is those words so clunky? And as soon as you put a camera on someone, the body goes stiff. What's happening there? And then I started to apply some of my discoveries, some of the postures, and include some of the postures into the training, and found that eventually, and it does take a time, people became more aware of how they use their bodies. So where they place their weight, where their tensions are, classically locking the knees and the position of the pelvis. And it took me, I have to say, it took me quite a while to notice that I lifted in my diaphragm. And I lifted in, when you lift in your diaphragm, your breath, therefore, obviously your breath changes and your emotional expression is a little bit limited. I hadn't been conscious of that. I'd done a fair amount of dance, and a lot of dance, particularly classical, they train you to lift. And I suddenly thought, oh, that's really interesting. That really inhibits the feeling. And I'd worked with a lot of dancers that wanted to act or became actors. And then I suddenly clocked that actually, let's work with the diaphragm. And we worked the diaphragm. And often the dancers found it difficult to speak. I mean, obviously they could speak, but they found when they're very good at expressing themselves physically, and the assumption is, oh, they're going to be great actors. But as soon as they said any lines, it just sounded really strange. So as soon as I started to realign the body, things fell into place. So all of that came from exploring with Qigong, and I'm working with flow as well, working with different timing and different rhythms and just a softness of the body, and through just repeated patterns of just basically waving your arms around in different ways. It's just amazing how it settles people's tempo. So instead of being really panicked or anxious, as soon as you start to ground, as soon as you take the breath down, as soon as you work from a lower place, it's almost instantaneous that something changes in the whole demeanor of the individual.
Energetic scientists would argue that energy channels are the most fundamental systems in our body and give rise to and regulate all other innate systems. Yoga describes a network of 72,000 nadis, or energy channels, throughout the body. Ancient Chinese practices outline 12 meridians, or energy highways that facilitate our energetic movement. These ancient notions have well sprung an array of scientific avenues, such as the examination of magnetic fields, electrophotonic emissions, brainwave frequencies, bioelectromagnetics, and energetic psychology. Why is this important? Well, biologist, researcher and president of Nature's Own Research Association, Dr. James Oshman, suggests that communication within energy fields can travel at speeds near that of speed of light, around 180,000 miles per second. This is much faster than we typically measure communication in the body, such as the communication through diffusible gases, neurochemical exchanges, or our nervous system. He suggests that the whole body is deeply connected by a living matrix of energy, like a spider's web linking all aspects of our being. And almost every scientist could agree that energy underpins all that we are. At the most basic level, our body is made up of matter, or billions of vibrating atoms in the form of protons, neutrons, and electrons. And Derek Lineweber, quantum physicist who featured in Professor Wilczek's 2004 Physics Nobel Prize lecture, suggests that these atomic structures are composed of mostly empty space. For example, in the case of a hydrogen atom, 99.9999999999996% empty space, and 0.000000004% hydrogen. And this empty space, which seems to account for the vast majority within an atom, is not actually vacant, but instead is made up of invisible vibrating energy, electrostatic fields. Meaning that 99.999999 and onwards percent of all that we are is actually energy. In truth, we are not human beings transmitting energy. We are energetic beings integrated into atoms, matter, and into a physical form. The realization of seeing ourselves primarily as an energetic being can be somewhat mind-boggling. But nevertheless, it can be extremely helpful when we wrap our minds around it. And connecting with your bodily energy is often easier than one might first assume. You only have to rub a balloon against your hair to see how a small electrical charge can make the balloon stick to your upside-down hand, or cause the strands of hair on your head to stand upright without the balloon even touching it. I imagine some listeners thinking, do you need to understand chi or feel it in order to engage in your work? Like when you work with someone, I imagine you don't necessarily go through that front door, you go through a side door and help them where the struggles they're facing at the time.
I've learned a few things about when to introduce it, because I have learned that I'll work with someone and I will know immediately that if I work with the body, if I work to work on trying to increase their flow and their energy, that's the solution. I know that's the solution. But sometimes the concept's a little alien and a little bit scary in a way. So working with the body, it can alarm people, as much as that sounds odd, because different sensations and different feelings arrive. And often as soon as you start to work, particularly with the diaphragm, it releases. And when it releases, then an individual might feel something that has been locked and stored there for a long time. And so there's a gentleness and there's a care. So from a teaching perspective, you have to be mindful of the individual and their history or who they are and how they feel. But also not saying too much about where the origins of the work is at first. If it's comfortable for someone, because it's usual to come to the text first, we'll come to the text first. And then I'll say something about, let's explore the idea that line is not in their head, it's in their feet, or it's in their gut. So it's coming from their gut. So it's coming from a different place of their body. And as soon as you start to explore that, then it'll instigate usually an interest. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that felt different. Okay, so now let's hone in on that feeling. What is that feeling? What did it feel like? Now let's work on the breath. So let's see what happens if we change your breath. So I do go in quite gently with people that are new to it, mainly because it's still a little bit of an alien concept. And when you're working with someone's body, you're working with the fragility, you're working with their history and their past. And so I don't know their past. I can look at the body and sort of say that, that looks like there's something going on there, but I don't know for sure what it is because I don't know them. So yeah, it's being careful. And I work with a lot of young people as well. My youngest professional actor is 8. And then, so I still do the same, let's work with your breath, or let's work with your feet, or let's work with do an exercise where we're just playing with just, throwing, even if it's throwing a ball, you're throwing the ball, but you're using your whole body just to get them, to invite them to express in a different way. So no matter who I work with, somehow the concepts and the ideas of working with energy is introduced.
And when they are ready and they are curious, how do you tend to open that door? Often I go back to time and time again of the rubbing the hands, and you don't even need to rub your hands, but just sort of focus your mind and your perspective on the energy between your hands, and eventually you start to feel a sort of repelling magnet in between, and then you can, from there, I can kind of create a conversation of going, well, what do you think that is? And how do you think your cells vibrate? How do you think all these beautiful tissues and move as one cohesively all the time? And it sprouts from there. How do you open that door with them when they're curious?
When they're curious, we might work more intensely. So we might work for a longer period of time on, say, for example, the feeling the energy between the hands, or doing a particular routine. We might, instead of doing it for 2 minutes, we might do it for 5, or we might do it for 10. Or I might say, in order to really allow the energy to settle and to work with this idea of flowing. Because I sometimes talk to them about flowing. How does your energy flow? What does it feel like? And I use myself as an example. I might say, I feel a little uneven. And for some reason, I feel like my right side is my left side feels depleted today, or it feels a little bit, but I might feel very buoyant on my right side. Or I've got this sensation. So I often use myself as a way in for them to think, oh, okay, maybe I feel that, or what's happening for me. But it's interesting that you've just said cells vibrate and the tissues. That's something that I possibly wouldn't say, because I know that, but I probably wouldn't say. I might use the word vibration, but unless they're people that have been working with me for a long time, I don't get too detailed on what is anatomically or really happening within the body. I say, let's see if you can feel it, because I still think there's a potential. Sometimes I've got 1 or 2 people that have been working with me for many years, and they don't do Qigong outside of working with me. So my work is geared towards actors. I've taught Qigong for people that are not actors before, and it's very different. Because actors, the very nature of the craft is that our instrument's our body. You haven't got anything else. You haven't got, like as a musician, it's got the piano or the violin. We've got our bodies. So your body has to be your main focus. So we know that the body is trained. You train your breath, you train to reduce tension. You become aware of your body. You're able to move your body in different ways to make that transition into different physicalities. But maybe that's something I should do, actually. Maybe I should talk a little bit more about it. I sometimes will guide people to articles. On the course, I teach a master's program, and the students they have a 3,000 word essay, part of their master's at the end. And very often, like this year, I have 5 that I'm supervising. All their work's about energy. So in that case, I will say, read Oshman, or go and look at, there's one that's on trauma. Look at Peter Levine, look at Barbara Rothschild, look at these people who really are at the forefront of understanding what is trauma in the body. But generally with people in the classroom, it's not something that I would say too much, because I suppose what I don't want them to do is to go into thinking. And I might throw an article out. I might say, read this article and see what you think, and come back and let's just have a chat about it and tell me any questions or any thoughts.
Yeah, interesting. If connecting with our energy is one way to kind of sensitize ourselves to it, is to work with our body. And you mentioned that book on trauma there. And when we do that, we tend to unlock stored emotion. We tend to unlock things that have been stagnant for a little while. Does that have an interplay with performance in the sense that the more someone has done their personal work and released those stored emotions and done their emotional, either psychodynamic work or reduced trauma within their body from the past, does that help them to become a better actor?
It gives them more accessibility to the whole of their bodies. So the kind of work that I do is called psychophysical, which you might argue everything is psychophysical, but as a kind of a method of acting, it's psychophysical, which means we work with the mind and the body, but we also say the mind and body connected, they're one. There's not a separation. Yes, very much those people that are primarily aware of how much their own history and their own emotional language or events that have happened that have created some traumatic response. Those people that are aware of that and have dealt with that very much have more connection, I would say. But it's not unusual to come across an actor, particularly at the earlier stages of their training, where you can see that there's a lot of reluctance to go into emotional places or complex emotions. And very often that's obviously connected with themselves. And there is the danger of being triggered to become over distressed, and a fear of connecting to an emotion, be it anger, be it sexuality. We're dealing with that. If your role needs it and you're not able to get to that place, then, well, first of all, you probably won't get the role you won't get the role. But yeah, very much. And that's why there is as I said earlier, there's a fragility about what you're working with, and you have to work safely. I wouldn't say everybody does do this, but you have to work with, nobody should leave a space, in my sessions anyway. Nobody leaves the space unless I feel that they're safe to leave that space. And what I mean by that is if we've gone through a scene which has required violence or which has required sadness or any form of emotion or even elation, at the balance in emotion, they leave the space in a balanced way. And the end of the session, very much, it might be either it's always coming together in a discussion. If it's not discussion, it's about grounding. So I'm trying to make sure that there is a return to some kind of state within their mind and body where they feel okay to go back into the world. And if somebody doesn't, then they stay behind. I feel very strongly about that, but I don't think that's everybody's practice, but it's certainly mine.
Yeah, well done. Creating that safe space. Mm. I feel it's essential for sustained performance, so the processing can be consolidated rather than negative. I imagine there's quite a complex area. When I look at people finding their flow and doing a great performance, there's an emotionality to it that's almost neutral, where it's just intuitive action. But with acting, I'm assuming actors have to really harness that emotion or harness the borrowed emotion from that particular role, from that particular individual. And by being emotional, that typically triggers our emotions or attached emotions or emotions that are connected to it. So I imagine there's a lot of triggering for actors that they might need to be emotional to be good at their role, but there's a double-edged sword where it's probably not helping them to perform at their role. How do you navigate that space with them?
So one of the things is about understanding how to tune your body and to know your body and to find that place where you feel safe, grounded, secure, balanced. So that's a training which not everybody does feel that in life. In fact, I would say probably quite a lot of people don't. So first of all, and part of the training is to get to understand your physicality and your emotionality and who are you and how do you feel and what are your emotions and what things are difficult for you and what things are not difficult for you. But also I work with the stance the keys dance in Qigong and Tai Chi, but Qigong in Wuqi. And Wuqi is where theoretically the energy, the yin and yang are balanced and the channels are balanced and channels are open. So I work on that repeatedly. So everybody who trains with me understands what Wuqi is. We spend time in that. We spend time working on ways and exercises and routines that balance. We spend time on grounding. We spend time on getting the breath, abdominal breath. So you're aware of the fact if your breath starts to rise, usually if you go into a state of anxiety or overwhelmed, your breath will rise. So you notice the sensations of what might happen. So if you like, there is one can't call it neutral, but there is a base point to return to. Now you're going off into play a scene where it requires an emotional journey, and the emotional journey might be somewhat turbulent. So we obviously work in a rehearsal, in a practice environment where you're playing around with that. But then we come back to it. Then we come back to that neutrality at different places in the session. So I might take somebody to a place, and then I'll say, okay, let's step out of that. Let's walk. So even if it's just something like walking into the emotional state in stages, and then let's walk out of it, and let's take a breath, and let's have a shake out, and let's have a drink of water. Let's change the temperature, if you like. And I do know actors that, they might have their own ways, be it cleansing, be it like water, be it a shower, be it something, but often, so I also teach strategies that if you feel that your body is becoming overwhelmed, you have some resources, and those resources will help you to get back into what feels safe for you. And that's usually connected with breath and routine and grounding, sending everything down. Don't let everything come up. Because as soon as everything starts to rise, then you're still working with fire. You're working with people's tendency to get a little bit overwhelmed. Yeah, those resources become crucial. And it's interesting because in trauma training, that's exactly what people like Levine and Rostad talk about. You have to have resources. When you're working with your emotions, potential to get triggered, you have to have resources. But first of all, you have to have an awareness and receptivity. You understand what it is, what's going on in my body. And a lot of the time when people come to me, they don't necessarily have that. So the awareness is that, I can feel tightness here. All right, well, let's work with that. What's happening here?
Yeah, and I imagine for a lot of people, they're learning on the spot. That emotional intelligence, as well as how to harness that emotion and that energy for the role, is a very, learning through doing. And you wrote an article on learning through doing and training, which prioritizes the exploration and discovery as a foundation for craft and artistic freedom. How does that differ from the concept of enactive learning? And can you give us the cliff notes of that article?
Yeah, to remember the article first. But yes, learning through doing is, for me, you're continually working on playing around, discovering. As soon as an actor makes a choice, they limit themselves to that choice. And in a way, the brain quite likes to make choices. You read it and you read a line and you think, okay, yeah, I've got that. I've got it up here. But you might not have it in here. Might not have it in your body. And so you might sound fine, but your body might be doing something totally different to what the line is. So the line might be, something very welcoming and, hey, how are you? Great. Like I'm feeling fantastic. And then all of a sudden you look at the body and you think that body is full of tension, and that's connected with them saying the line, but it's not absorbed into the body. So the notion of doing is that you're playing, you're exploring, you're being like that imaginative child that as we grow, we somehow leave behind. You're able to go into the other space, which is not your own reality. And also, I'll often say to people, as soon as you pick up a script, get up and walk with it. Now, the script doesn't require you to walk, but it's about you engaging your body. So the doing is about involving everything, because if you give someone an opportunity to think, they will think. So it's like, let's get up and let's do, and let's take some options. So and then through learning, you make discoveries. you discover, oh, that's interesting. It could be this or it could be that. Or I feel different now because I've done it in that way. That's the experimentation. It's just taking yourself through options. Now, there's also the imaginative. So your imagination is obviously based on what you've experienced, what you've seen, your imagination is partially also about your perceptions, but you can all of a sudden start to flavor that with other things, which is what I encourage people to do. So that if I say a beach, you're probably going to go to the beach that but then you might add something different as you're talking to them. You might say, oh no, well, this beach has got a different color sand. What is it? This beach has got a different type of water. What's the water? What's the feel of the water? Is it kind of like very kind of the waves crashing, or is it just really gentle? This scene's got some creatures on it. What are the creatures? And you start to then bring in other elements. And there's something about the imagination which makes it in a way safe as well, because you've sort of left your own experiences. Now, I suppose if you talk about enactive learning, you could also be talking about experiences that you have primarily experienced. So if I'm talking about a role which requires mourning because of a death, someone's died. Now, yes, it's fact. I will draw on people that I know that have passed away. I will draw on my own experiences. But how safe is that to do it identically and to repeat that? And so to go into the imagination actually means that somehow, I don't think you can't help but not draw on yourself, but to go into the imagination in some ways also flavors the work. It gives it something slightly different. However, having said that, there are many roles where you have to experience, if you're playing a chef, it's not unlikely that someone will go and experience what it's like to be in a kitchen. For you to get a real sense of the atmosphere. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing that if you're going to play a teacher, then you should observe teachers. If you're going to be a doctor, you can't become a doctor. You can't go and do an operation, but you can observe them and look at and trying to get a grasp on their knowledge. So in some ways, both of them are pretty essential, I would say, for convincing the audience that you are who you're supposed to be.
Thanks for listening. If you're enjoying this episode, please hit the subscribe or follow button. Every subscription helps me to spend more time making this show even more valuable for you. So please hit the subscribe button now. Okay, let's dive back in. And how do you connect the Qigong knowledge with somatic psychology in your work? You've talked about connecting with person's body and seeing that as an energetic expression. How do you engage with a client?
I encountered somatic psychology through therapy that I personally have had, and also through therapists that I know. And one particular person suggested that I read Stanley Kellerman quite a long time ago. And there's this book called The Emotional Anatomy, which I think is an absolute brilliant book. It's composed of diagrams of the body. And the diagrams show what you might call archetypal postures that are familiar in different states. So there might be something, they might be bloated, they might be collapsed, they might be rigid. And I suppose they're archetypal because they're recognizable body shapes that the human being gets into when it's experiencing something. So fear, typically we might all go rigid. When we're boasting about something, we might get a little bloated. When we're somewhat distressed or depressed, often the body kind of collapses. So these are shapes that the body creates, which express our emotional truth. So someone might say to you, you might say, "Hi, how are you?" And they might say, "I'm great. I'm really good. Thank you." And you look at the body and you think, really? There's a little collapse there, or there's a tight breath. So the body is very truthful. The body really finds it difficult to lie. So that, working with Kellerman's work largely, I became very fascinated with that, and then started to look at, when applying characters, to look at, if you like, the architecture of the body. So to work in quite an enlarged way, so to say, okay, we've got this person, And these are all the descriptors. This is the behavior of this individual. This is the history of this individual. What kind of body do we think? And let's use these archetypal shapes as a starting point or as movement vocabulary. So you might say there's a particular point where someone might just, even if it's just a beat, just slightly collapse at the prospect of not getting what they want, or, the world has come crashing down. You're not buoyant. There's very few people are buoyant when everything's gone wrong. There's a kind of a typical response to that. So somatic psychology helped me, or gave me, again, a resource to explore and to play with. And then how you add the Qigong to that is you think, like, what happens? So we work with Wuqi, which is this position where the body can flow, the breath flows. You're connecting in with the meridian channels. Everything feels great. And then you all of a sudden say, okay, let's collapse. And you collapse and you use the diaphragm as the point of collapse. So the diaphragm goes in a little bit. When the diaphragm goes in, then the organs will be seriously affected, of course, and the flow of the breath will be affected. And then that sensation, it's just like, what does that feel like? Oh, it feels a challenge. It feels difficult. What does it feel like if, you're very rigid? And some people live in a rigid state. But if you're an actor, you can't live in a rigid state, because the idea is, at a basic level, that you're working to have the physicality that you can transform. And I mean change, like not everybody, every character you have will have the same actions, the same gestures, the same overall shape of their body. Of course they won't, because not every individual is different. So you're translating the information on the page into a physicality. And so working with, okay, this is a person that obviously lives a very tense life. So their body might be different to yours, to experience what it feels like. So we play with that. And then with the Qigong, we look at, this is what the changes are, but now you're using the Qigong to return. You're using the Qigong to return back to something which is slightly more stable and more pleasant for the body to experience than the collapsed state, or the rigidity, or the bloatedness.
So let's say we have a performer, they're on stage, they've suddenly gone into their head a little bit too much. They've become self-conscious, perhaps, gone a bit wooden, a bit rigid, and they're struggling to really connect to that role. What do you do? And do you work with your energy in transmitting that to them, as many therapies, be it Reiki, be it something else, engage in to sort of facilitate that? Or do you purely work on helping them understand their energy and the relationship that they have with how they're connecting in that moment?
What I often say to them, if you feel scared, or if you feel anxious, then don't hide that. Work with it. Because as soon as you understand my body is anxious, it will start to leave. Whereas if you work and act with anxiety, then you won't, where is it? It will be it will basically go to pot, because you won't be able to reach where the character is meant to go, and you're somehow got this inner struggle. So if you feel anxious, recognize it. I feel anxious. I'm anxious. Breathe into the anxiety. Just use your breath. I mean, the breath is the solution to most things, to be honest. It's just breathe in, abdominal breath. Feel the power of your breath. And stop, because the chances are what has happened in that situation is the breath has got light and moved to the upper body, light and quick. The breath will have changed. The breath will be automatically kind of disrupting or joining in the chaos. The breath will be part of that. So channel the breath, so I might, if someone starts and they start a monologue or whatever, or a scene, and they're feeling anxious, I might stop and say, okay, what's happening? What are you feeling? I'm noticing your breath feels a bit high. Let's move your breath down. Let's give it a go and let's see. Or my classic thing is to work with the feet. So acknowledge your feet, unlock, because if you've lost your sense of where you're supposed to be in a scene, your body, going back to those archetypal shapes of Stanley Kellerman, your body has probably gone tight. Might not have gone rigid, but it would have got held. because it's almost automatic. It will have done that. So do the opposite, loosen off, recognize. So one of my solutions is when the body, and this works quite well on camera, actually. If you're often on camera on tight shot, it's quite common for the upper body, your lower half of your body. I can tell on your face if your knees and your lower part of your body is locked. Why? Because there's tension. Because if you lock your knees, then your facial muscles will be affected by that. And people think that's ridiculous. Of course, it's not ridiculous. It makes sense. If there's tension in one part of the body, it will be shown. If you're on a close-up and your body is locked, we can see on your face what's happening. So I often say, move your weight. When we are normally communicating with each other, we move our weight through our feet, even if we're sitting down. I'm talking to you now. I move back, my weight goes to my heels. I move forward, my weight goes forward. So I say, hook into your feet at all times. And if you're doing a scene and you just notice you've gone tight, go into your feet. Because you go into your feet, it somehow offers a little bit more. The body starts to relax a little bit more. It connects. It remembers you've got a lower half rather than actually I've just got my head and my chest. Oh, hang on. I've also got some legs. And that's almost like an instant. On camera, it instantly changes things. On stage, if you're an experienced actor, by the time you've worked on the play, you know the flow. You know the flow of the scene. But yeah, of course, there are moments when people come out. That's almost going to happen.
And what is the Michael Chekhov technique, if I've pronounced that correctly?
Yeah, Michael Chekhov. Well, Michael Chekhov was the nephew of the Russian playwright, Anton Chekhov. So they're two very different. But Michael Chekhov became an actor and he worked with Stanislavski, who is a very famous Russian actor trainer in the early part of the 20th century. So they were in Russia and he was part of Moscow Arts Theatre around 1910. And so he was training with Stanislavski and then he developed his own system of working. And he became very interested in Rudolf Steiner. So that kind of Rudolf Steiner's concept of the physicality and the physical eurythmy was something that he developed. And he also became interested in Eastern philosophy, did Michael Chekhov. As did Stanislavski, actually. Yoga was taught in Moscow Arts Theatre in 1910, so it was quite kind of revolutionary in a way. So he developed his system, which is holistic. So it's working with the whole of the body. And he developed a series of exercises which work with a whole process, a whole methodology, which was to encourage the actor to get expressive and also to work with the imagination. So there's quite a famous story about Michael Chekhov that he did a scene and he was so playing someone whose father had died. And afterwards, Stanislavski, or whoever it was, I don't know if it's Stanislavski, just said, I'm so sorry about your father. And he said, my father's not dead. I was imagining, it was acting. It wasn't real. And so his approach is not necessarily to dwell on your personal experiences, but to go into the imagination. And I trained, Chekhov had to leave Russia when in the Stalin regime around 1927, 28. And he came to Europe, traveled around Europe, and he ended up, quite strangely, in Dartington, in Devon, Dartington College of Arts in 1936, again with Rudolf Laban, with the Host Ballet, with loads of experimental people, because there was this, Dorothy Elmhurst had set up this fairly alternative environment at this enormous house at Dartington Hall, and he played around and developed his work there with Laban. So there's a real crossover in their work. And it's very playful, very open. Psychological gesture is his main thing, which again draws into somatic psychology, that your one gesture can be the summative expression of what's going on in your mind. And that's true. We gesture all the time, and what we do with a gesture is actually expressing what we're thinking. And so psychological gesture was one of his massive things. And then I landed at Dartington. I trained at Dartington myself. So obviously much later. And it's an amazing place, which just at that time, it's closed down now. It trained creatives. So it just trained people to be expressive and creative and playful and imaginative and slightly wacky, because it wasn't traditional. which might have been why. And he had a real spiritual connection as well. He's very much into the notion of the spirit, which is why I think the Russian regime decided that he should be exiled or sent somewhere.
Yeah, I was at Dartington House only a couple of weeks ago. Beautiful, beautiful grounds and a beautiful place, and still doing some storytelling courses and still active in some things. And they got a beautiful little cinema there.
It is. It changed. That cinema, the Barn Theatre, is amazing. Yeah, I've seen many a film. We did very different kind of training to what you would do if you went to, at that time, Landa or RADA or one of the, or Central, which is where I work now. We did very different. We went walking on the moors. We went watching the sunrise. We went for running around the Dards. We led on the floor in those gardens and looked at the sky, and you think, like, what on earth was I doing? And I did think that at the time when I was 19. I didn't understand what any of this is about, but I'm just going to go with it and see. And much later, and we did do loads of physical experimentation, which was, for a 19, 20, 21-year-old, this is madness. Later on, I appreciated it and understood what it was. But I often say to people that I work with now, this might not make sense now, but it will later. Just trust it will later. And I think that Chekhov would have been, he died in 1955 in America. He went over to America after he finished at Dartington. I think he very much would have been interested in energy. I think that's where he would have moved, because his idea of radiation, that's his concept, this idea of radiation. He was what is radiation? What does it do? The thoughts are like a river of energy, which is a really nice concept, meaning that the thoughts go from here into your body like a river, like water. And so the imagery, I think is really beautiful. He uses this exercise called imaginary body, where you imagine the body of the character, and that body can be different to you. It can be fatter, thinner, longer nose, long fingers. It can be completely different. And you kind of step into this imaginative body, and somehow something happens. It kind of transforms, and then you work with different energies to sort of see what fits the character. So I think he was very much before his time.
I got fascinated with energy and how we can connect with it, harness it, and so forth. When I originally studied Reiki many moons ago now, maybe 10 years or 15 years ago. And how has James Oschman's work influenced you? I
discovered James Oschman around the time when I was doing a training to teach Qigong. And I also did a course called, when I was writing The Energetic Performer, I did a course called Living Anatomy, which is the course that people who train to be cranial sacral therapists do. So it's really working on understanding the anatomy. And it's the fundamental course that you have to do, but it obviously, because it's cranial sacral therapy, it's working with energy. And Oschman was somebody that they asked us to read, and I bought his book on energy medicine, and again my eyes just opened. This is really fascinating. And on that course of Living Anatomy, we looked at embryology, and we looked at the movement of the cells and the development of the cells, and the shapes that the cells make when the fetus is growing or at conception. And it was really interesting talking about figures of 8 and talk about flutters and talk about the movement of the cells within that initial stage of embryology. And in Qigong, we talk a lot about figures of 8, about figures of 8 existing in the environment, figures of 8 in the body. And often I will just get people to move in a figure of 8, just move in the figure of 8 and then move the other way in a figure of 8. And also that idea of there are sensations in the body that are the body really knows, because, and this is what I got from that course and reading Oschman's book, it knows because it's always been with it. So that flutters, that kind of slight movement that we get, that we feel in our stomach, where we feel a bit anxious or nervous or apprehensive. The body knows that because they're formative movement of the cell structures. And so all of that I really found absolutely amazing. And then from Oschman started to read other people as well. And I came across the biologist Mae Won Ho, and she talks about quantum cohesion. And I think what I do is I translate it. I actually do find the pure science of it quite complex and difficult, but I persevered and read quite a lot of books. And I think I translated it in my own way. Whether or not it's correct is another matter. But that idea of cohesion for me is about things moving in the same way, moving that there's some, there's like the cells are talking to each other and everything is communicating in a cohesive way. And I think we all know the sensations of when the cells are not cohesive. We might not use that language, or my cells are uncohesive at the moment, but when you feel a bit chaotic or a bit unsure, and obviously what's happening, the inner movement down to the cells, the movement of the cells is moving, is vibrating. And that I got from reading Oshman and all of the people he suggested. It's fascinating because I never really got that from school. I never got that from biology at school. I never really understood what I understand now would have been really useful, but that didn't come from school. It came from later learning. And that's very much what I feel, that certainly as a practitioner who's working with the body, you have to know about it. You have to train your own body and you have to understand it and you have to keep understanding it. So I'm about to encounter a little bit, talking about trauma. I'm really fascinated in the playing of trauma for the actor. What does that mean for the playing of trauma for the actor's body? Where do they take themselves? How safe is that? How can we do that safely? What is happening? So that's my next thing that I'm somehow going to launch myself into. But yeah, Oshman and all of those early pioneers of energy work are really instrumental, I think, certainly for me.
Yeah, he gives a great rundown of the science and the biology of how energy affects our body and is integral to it, and his idea of the living matrix underpinning all our systems that are operating, I found absolutely fascinating and really helped my eyes to open towards things like Reiki. You mentioned craniosacral therapy there. Had some craniosacral therapy when I was quite young. Didn't know much about it at the time and kind of went in quite green and ignorant about the whole thing, but found the whole process absolutely incredible in terms of intuitively sitting with my body, and asking myself quite specific questions and seeing how the body would respond, obviously facilitated through someone at the time, and I ended up curled up in a corner crying and releasing energy and releasing this kind of locked, stored energy and coming out as raw emotion. And do you ever do that with any of your clients in terms of helping them to become more aware of connecting with their body and how energy is stored in different parts of the body?
I do. I mean, talking about training, like I have craniosacral therapy every month. I have a session every month. Even if my body's not needing it, I have it. So I have the same person that I've been working with for literally 25 years. So she knows my body and it's pretty amazing stuff. And often I recommend people to go and see either her or a cranial therapist. But what I'm really clear about is I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychotherapist. I have done a fair amount of training in therapy, but I'm not a psychotherapist. Obviously, I've trained in some areas of body work, but I think it's really clear to say I'll do what I think I can do, but I'm not going to go into territories that are not my expertise. So at this moment in time, working with people's traumas is not my expertise. And so I'm not going to I will know when I feel something safe. And that comes from doing the practice myself. And that I think is important, is that as a practitioner, I work on myself. I don't just, talk from a book. This is something that I do and I practice. And therefore I can get a sense of what I think might be happening in the other person. So if somebody's distressed, yes, I will work with them, but I will only go as safe as I feel I know my knowledge base goes. And because I think that's right. Particularly in acting, there has been, the record is not great for some acting training about how, people can become over distressed and you go back to your childhood traumas. I'm not taking anybody back to their childhood traumas because I don't know how to get them out of it. I have some tools, but I'm not a trauma therapist and I'm not a psychotherapist. And I will facilitate what I know. I know a lot and I know how to do it, but I'm certainly not going to go off my own expertise. I wouldn't announce myself as a psychotherapist or a trauma therapist.
And to get a bit more practical again, so you've worked with someone, they're emotionally aware, they're energetically aware, they have their go-to areas for when they get distracted or they feel conflict and they're able to kind of recenter. Oshman described flow as if every single cell in the body was moving towards one aim. How do you help people go from that state of presence and awareness into that effortlessness and that intuitive action and flow?
Well, so the actor might be in flow, but the thing about acting is you're taking on a role. So you have to flow into that role. So I often talk about 3 circles where you have first is you standing in it, and that's you. Then there's a middle circle, which is, if you like, is the liminal. It's a transitionary phase. And then you have the 3rd circle, which is the character. So you have to go through that liminal, that in-between stage, that place where you're exploring in order to get to that 3rd circle. You can, if you like, just go from first to second. And that means that you can, first to third, sorry. And that means in that middle circle, you haven't done that kind of embodying, if you like, for acting. You know, in theory, if you have a physicality which is easy, you know how to control your body is loose. You're aware of your tensions. You're receptive to other people. You can just flow in there. But actually taking on the story, I feel I've never worked with anybody that doesn't have to go through a process, a journey that gets then eventually, once you understand and you can step into the shoes and you can step into the imaginative circumstances, then you can flow. So you can flow as the individual, but then you're taking on the behavior of somebody else. It's a slightly different thing from, you're training to be, a runner, and your body, you understand flow and you understand where you need to go and you have visuals and I think with acting, it's because you're taking on different circumstances and those circumstances are not your own. So you have to flow into those. So you go through a journey. Sometimes I had somebody I was working with a couple of weeks ago and there was an aspect of the character which was difficult for him because the character is quite confrontational, and this person is not confrontational. In his own life, he flows very easily, but he's not confrontational. And confrontational is not necessarily easy if you don't know it. And so that's what we explored. How do you become comfortable in the confrontation? Because that character confronts everybody. Somebody's in a cafe and he orders a coffee. It's like, what is this? Why did you order this? Why did you bring this? Everything is confrontational about this individual. So he needed to flow in. He needed to learn how to flow into that discomfort of the confrontation. So it's taking your body into different places. But once you, and also, especially when you're filming, if your body's not relaxed and you're not focused on where you need to go, then your mind might think you've got it, but your body might not get it. So for him, what was happening is he understood the lines. His body just couldn't look like it was confrontational. So somehow there was something going on there. So we did some work that moved him into that.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So it's a transitional phase. It's a journey into.
Yeah. Am I right in saying that the mastery of acting or the ideal is where they believe they are, method acting, where they believe that they are that role? Or is it always good to, I guess, have a complexity there where they can see both worlds?
I think you do have to see both worlds because you have to return to your own reality. But for the moment you're acting, you are that person who is conducting an orchestra. And you do, and that's it. You are that person. And because that's when you'll flow into it. The minute you believe you're not, They have to believe it for us to believe it. For the viewer to believe it, they have to believe it. So you do have to enter into that. And I say, cited with that example from Michael Chekhov, he had to believe that he was at a funeral and the funeral of his father's. He knew it wasn't his father's, but he imagined it. When a child is playing a game about being in space or whatever, we know they're not in space. They're in the bedroom, but for them, they're in space. And so it's that surrendering to the imagination and freeing up the imagination so you can, for this short period of time, and it's what makes theatre different to film. Because on theatre, you stay with it for the whole journey of whatever the length of the play is. But for film, we shoot in extracts. And so in some ways, some people stay in character and some people don't. It's very difficult to stay in character on a film set. They're very busy places. But if you, for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever, or for this take, you are that person in that dilemma. You are. And you're acting as that character would act, not as you would act, not as you would behave, as that character would behave.
I feel like I can talk about this and on, but we are coming to the end. And we typically end with 2 questions, starting initially with a book or a film that has either changed your life or had a huge impact on you.
The Anatomy of the Spirit is a book that I mentioned to you by Caroline Myers. And the reason why this book is so impactful for me is she really talks about how the body picks up and receives things. She not only goes through all sorts of things like the chakras, she's very informative about body, about different cultural perspectives, but she talks about energy management in a way, and she talks about how we use our bodies. If we use our bodies in a certain way, it will lead to the body being diseased. And I think that concept of we can use, if you are in a state of permanent, we make a choice. We choose how we use our bodies. We choose how we use our lives, how we live our lives. And if we live our lives where it doesn't suit the body, then the body will react. And be that living and working with immense stress, which a lot of us do. And if you don't just suddenly think, hang on, this is just not serving me, I'm not feeling right. If you don't take action, then the body will become diseased. And then when the body becomes diseased, all sorts of things can happen, obviously. And she gives a lot of case studies of where she's worked with people. And sometimes it's worked and sometimes it's not. But I think her writing is quite phenomenal about really explaining that notion or that truth that we choose how we work with our bodies.
Yeah, I love that. Fantastic.
Time to flip the mic.
The question for you was, why do you think it is so difficult for people to really believe and understand flow in our world?
It's an interesting one, that, because flow is so intuitively recognizable. If often when I describe it, most people are like, oh yeah, I felt like that. But then when they try to understand it, there's this sudden disconnect. It gets put, first of all, it gets put in this confusing, illusionary, wishy-washy basket of I don't really understand it, so it probably doesn't exist. And we confuse it a lot with other things, luck, or the ego gets involved or whatever. So I think there's a lot of, ambiguity about the construct. But I think the main reason is because when I look at the science behind it, it's really, helped me to understand the felt experience of it. And typically when we're in flow, we're in a energetic space, right? We're from a cognitive position, we're using that implicit cognition. From a sensorial position, we're using our kind of senses. And what we're not using is what I call the thinking brain. Right, and that explicit cognition, that when people then try to understand flow, we use the thinking brain to try and understand it. So we're trying to sort of understand something that we're disconnected from. And so it becomes even more difficult to really kind of grapple with it and really understand it. And so, so part of what I find bridges that gap is sort of regressing people to flow experiences. Understanding when they felt, in the words we're using, every cell is just focused towards one end and everything's moving effortlessly to that end. And then breaking that up with some reflective understanding, coming back to it, reflective understanding, coming back. So we're kind of building intelligence, that innate wisdom is turning into intellectual intelligence. And then we can start mapping that across to what is flow and why is it important and why should I integrate it into my life. So I think that's a huge point. And then secondly, I think flow gets used for everything, whether you're a yoga instructor or I saw a bank using it for advertising insurance the other day. So it's kind of, it's branded about as so many things that it's a word that, a bit like happiness, I guess, or success. It's a word that people like and desire, but not necessarily, I guess, truly understand. Thank you so much for your time, Amanda. Great to chat. Even just on that last sentence of surrendering into the imagination, I feel like we could have a whole pod just on that, on the last comment. Thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed my conversation with Amanda. I left feeling that there were many rabbit holes left untouched. Amanda seems to have taken the learnings from the energetic arts, such as Qigong and Tai Chi, and mixed them with performance psychology and psychophysiological coaching. I always find it fascinating when someone can achieve a level of mastery in an area that they can creatively integrate with another. When we see ourselves primarily as an energetic being, and perform from this perspective, we can begin to free ourselves from many of the mental and physical limitations that often plague our actions. An example of this, which I've been given permission to talk about, is my work with Homero Diaz, 8-time national champion enduro rider. When he prepares for a competition, every single time, right before he starts, he puts the motorbike in neutral, takes off his gloves, rubs his hands together, and works to shift his attention towards the heat between his hands. This is a starting point for him to focus on the energy between his hands. He says, "When I feel the energy between my hands, I cannot be sad or nervous. I always smile. I feel energized, in a good way." By tuning into this energetic awareness, we can quickly move beyond doubt, fatigue, and distraction. Not only that, through tuning our energetics, we can unleash improved ability. Time and time again, by simply helping my clients to improve their sensitivity to energetics, I've helped elite rugby players kick a ball 10 to 20 meters further. I've helped tennis players hit faster serves. And runners let go of the pain from a long run and find the lightness to run further. It's also one of the reasons I like to jump up and down before going out on a stage before a keynote. Helps me to dislodge any stuck energy and feel the vibrating energy within my body. Harnessing our already existing energetic connection is not just about performance improvement, but also about healing, connection in our relationships, and seeing the world as interactions and a continuous exchange of energy, which can help us to get perspective, unlock blockages, make life work for us, or tap into energy streams rather than fight against them. Harnessing your natural flow of energy is not something that you need to think about, but rather something that you need to embody and sense. The more we think about it, the further we go away from feeling it. It requires a sensitivity that is foreign to our thinking brain, but central to many of our other systems. It is a sensitivity that we need to train, an awareness that we need to grow. A practice that you can start today by simply seeing the world before you as full of energy and feeling the energy vibrating through your own body. Thank you for listening to Flow Unleashed. If you enjoyed listening, please subscribe to get notified when our next episode drops. The more people that subscribe, the better I can make the show for you. Equally, please leave a review. Your review will go a long way to helping others find this pod. Until the next time, thank you for listening to Flow Unleashed.